on one hand, startups are uniquely equipped to rip themselves apart and reconfigure to respond to this new world, this new environment, and see the challenges. And on the other hand, the missions that we choose to solve, that's in all our DNA. And it then becomes a question of being true to yourself and true to the values of your organization in whatever new thing you rebuild yourself to become.
Hello there. So today we are with Philip Mundy, founder of what I had known as Forward Health, now Pando. It's been a transition for them as well, but it's a business, it's a startup that works in the healthcare space. So because of that reason, and because Philip is very experienced as a founder, I thought this was a really interesting conversation we had to have to get his insights, to understand what's going on with this current situation, especially in a way so people from other startups and other founders can look at what's working, what's not, how other companies and startups are dealing with the challenges and can actually adapt and share that learning. Philip, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you as well. So let's jump to it if you don't mind. So I would like to start with this VWFH, work from home situation, which has its own abbreviation now. I guess it always did, but it's quite popular now. So how is your team dealing with being remote, working from home? How are you dealing with that? I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it's a great question. So, in a sense, being part of the tech community, we are quite fortunate in the wider context. Most of our team, they work from their MacBooks, right? And they can do that from the office, or they can do that, well, broadly speaking, from anywhere, as long as they have access to decent internet. And like a lot of tech companies, we also use platforms like Slack, like other collaboration platforms that actually don't require us to be in the same room together. So it's kind of in our DNA to be able to work remotely. And in fact, earlier this year, we started thinking more deeply about what we actually call agile working. We thought actually calling it work from home had almost a bit of a stigma to it. The suggestion is almost that you're not working, that you're doing something else. And so we wanted to...
But it's a relaxed day at work type of a situation, almost, people understand it.
Well, this is it. So it's for the engineers, you see, and it means something different to everybody. To the engineers, they think of it more like focus time, time where they can really get into the more difficult challenges. So we as a company have thought about it as agile working rather than work from home. And we spent some time thinking about how to get it right. Now, up until sort of the end of February, as an organisation, we'd probably, our maximum sort of number of people out of the office on any one working day would be maybe half. Okay, so maybe I think that's about typical, right? Now, of course, we're all out of the office, so I think in some ways, we were ready for this even before it happened. But in other ways, it's the complete decentralization of the company, which has sort of raised new challenges. Everything that we have done remotely previously, we are now doing on a scale that we'd never experienced before. So, yeah, I think we've coped relatively well. But I just want to say that we're really grateful to be part of the tech industry because, it makes it so possible.
Yeah, in a way, you were halfway there. I think we are going to find a good balance in terms of in which situations a face-to-face meeting is absolutely necessary and is preferable versus when can remote working will suffice. I think this has nudged us in the right direction to figure that out. But let's jump on to, if you don't have any pressing comments about this working from home situation, to actually how things have changed for you past the C-19 situation. And I think introducing for the people who are just listening to you for the first time, what Pando was currently doing before C19, if it has changed to a certain extent, what are you focused on right now? What are your thoughts on that?
No, sure. So if you're new to to what we do as a company, we're a clinical messaging platform. Okay, so we are an instant messaging platform for healthcare workers. That's doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists, and we essentially enable them to discover each other and share information in real time. We believe that good healthcare is built on great communication, and so we've tried to build the best communication platform in the world for healthcare teams. Now, when you think about that, we're in the space of remote collaboration, almost by design. And when COVID-19 started, just to give you some sort of insight into how our world has changed, not only were we working in our office, but we would probably see about 100 and 150 new doctors joining the network every day. For the last few weeks, we've seen over 1,000 join every day. And for us, that's come with a host of challenges, not least how do we make our engineering and server infrastructure capable of supporting 400-500% increase in engagement. And we're seeing growth in every dimension for the platform, but also how do we do that, as you say, not from the same place. Almost overnight, we've become a 24/7 organization in a way that we hadn't before. Our network has grown to just under 50,000 now in the UK. And before all this, we were just under 30,000. So we have literally doubled as an organization in the last 4 weeks.
It's quite interesting. So how directly or indirectly do you think Pando is helping with the current crisis right now?
Sure. So I think the way we think about it, the way I sometimes talk about it, is that when extreme changes happen, or when we're in an extreme situation, it's a little bit like turning the contrast up on an image. The lights become very light, the darks become very dark. And I think for any startup, what that shows you are the parts of what you do that are truly valuable. So we've seen the platform being used in a small number of profoundly valuable ways. One of them is around broadcasting information. A great challenge faced by every healthcare organization is, how do you ensure that your people have access to a single source of truth, especially in an environment with a fast changing information? So broadcasting information has been a core use case for the platform. But there's a really interesting one as well, actually, which just came from some of our community teams last week. Increasingly, it's important to keep patients away from hospitals, especially if they're in particular at-risk groups. And one of our groups of community physicians described this in a really nice way. They described it as bringing A&E to the patient rather than bringing the patient to A&E. And so what they're using the platform for is consulting with A&E doctors when they're with potentially at-risk patients in the community, which is fantastic. So it's a form of telehealth. But for us, it's this idea of being able to get the right information at the right time, no matter where you are. So yeah, for us, it's about sharing information, both at scale, but also at depth, and being able to get that expert opinion on a patient, all from your mobile platform.
So what are some new features you're working on, or some challenges you are currently busy with?
Yeah, so a really interesting one on this topic of broadcasting information. So classically, and I think when we last spoke, we had the standard stuff like one-on-one messaging and team-based messaging. But we actually opened up a new platform feature called Forums about 10 days ago now. Now, forums are really handy things. They're essentially public spaces that can be created by anyone in the healthcare organization, and they can post information, they can ask questions, and we're seeing hundreds of people join them. So these are essentially, these are places where our healthcare professional users can essentially get information from their organization. They can ask questions, and again, it's that single place where information can be shared, really clearly and really accurately. So that's a new feature that we've launched quite recently. And also our desktop version, which was in development when you and I last spoke, but has now been launched. That now represents just under 10% of all of our active daily users, which is fantastic. And we're switching on new features like video consultation. And really we're just doubling down on, as you say, it's how do you work like you're right beside somebody when you're not? And that's really what we're focused on achieving.
It's incredible. It couldn't be any more relevant to the situation and current problems we are having right now. And it's a testament to the importance and power of startups in a way. The problem you're working on sometimes feels like a remote problem until you come face to face with a situation where you desperately need it. And I think Pando has that potential. It has that in actuality today rather than a potential, but the increase is, I think, very encouraging.
Yeah, it's been a really challenging time for us, because our team's the same size. So like we're still 30 people, but we're dealing now with a responsibility several times more than the one that those 30 people were responsible for only a month ago. And of course, we've become a more international organization. I think there were a number of things. Okay, so it's not news to say that an entrepreneur is optimistic, but I think some of the cause for optimism and just profound inspiration are around the way that actually I think startups are collaborating, but also countries are collaborating. And there's absolutely no sense of, us versus them. This is everybody together doing what they can to beat something that is a threat to us all. So we're having more international conversations with more healthcare services and systems. We're speaking with more health tech companies about how we can collaborate and share our expertise. And it's actually been a remarkable time for innovation in healthcare. We say, this is no exaggeration, that there's been more innovation in healthcare in the last 2 weeks than there has been in the last 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I think that may even be minimizing the impact.
Is also showing the relative importance of healthcare versus other sectors. Not that they're not important, but it just helps people put into perspective what is really important in life at times like this. Well, I'm not quite sure about how collaborative every sphere of business life or politics and other national economic interests, because there's one of the current tensions is between nationalist policies that weigh in heavily on surveillance and a potential pull towards more totalitarian regimes, and at least a threat of that. Usually what we've seen when we look at history is whenever humanity faces with a big threat, fear increases, and that in turn, in time, creates more autocratic and fascist regimes, which is, I think, a threat that we should all be wary of. But in the subspace of technology and healthcare, it's very encouraging to hear that there's a collaboration spirit going on. With that in mind, I'd like to segue to what the industry is looking in your observation, and I'm talking specifically about the UK tech startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
In terms of some doors are closing, some new opportunities are arising in their place.
Yeah.
A sudden shift of attitude is what's being discussed in terms of investment, but including investment and other opportunities, and how startups are gonna be built and evolve. What are some of your observations?
Wow, that's a
big question. I'm sorry.
That's a big question. Sure. So I think we're well supported. So I mean, I'm close with a number of companies in London, and of course, my last project, Good Lord, I speak with the team there quite regularly, and I know that they're taking advantage of the support from the government, which is really very important. Keeping the economy strong is critical. But I think for a lot of companies and a lot of industries, there's still an atmosphere of profound uncertainty. It's very difficult to know how long this almost hibernation state is going to continue. I think like the macro message on startups is that they're designed to be anti-fragile. They're all constantly in a state of being pulled apart and put back together again. At least we try to be. We always try to be looking at what we've created for what it is, which is an imperfect response to some unmet need. And that general philosophy is actually like a pretty good one in uncertain times, because you don't look at what you've built, whether it's your product or your startup or even your team, and say it's fully formed and perfect. You look at it and think, okay, it's our current best guess, but can we make it better, right? And I suppose what we're doing is that, but at an accelerated rate. Okay, I suppose the question's going to be, do you adapt? Do you completely change direction? Do you consolidate, or something else? And I think there's sometimes a temptation to try to become something very different, and that will absolutely work for some companies. But I suppose I really feel for the organizations that are perhaps unsure as to how long it's going to be before they can return to what they do. I think it's going to be deeply challenging. I think some of the guidance that's been sort of shared from people who've been through other sort of economic challenges in the startup space, because I think, of course, 2008 was maybe the most relevant example, was that the changes you make are worth making fast, and they're worth making soon, and it's worth being decisive. One lens that someone I spoke to invited me to think through was, if you cut your costs by 50% when you have a month to go, that gives you 2 months. If you cut your costs by 50% when you have 12 months to go, that gives you 2 years. And although that's a stark question to ask of any company, it's absolutely worth asking.
Would it be okay to say that if you understand the philosophy of building a startup, being truly agile and being truly adaptive, then this COVID situation is a challenge, but it's not structurally different than the other challenges you have. You would not essentially need to reshift the way you think just to accommodate this fact. It is still about finding imperfect solutions to problems that you think exist.
So 100%, right? That's absolutely accurate. This should be the great advantage to smaller, more agile organizations. Okay, we make decisions in real time. We're small, agile teams. We can move in ways that large organizations can't. Right? Now, really, we've all woken up in a very different environment. It's now a question of becoming fit for that environment, adapting to it. I think the challenges are going to be, when I think about as a founder and feeling very fortunate that, Pando as an organization, we were speaking as a team on Friday when we do our OKRs and our stand-up still, and we had 30 people on our call. It was really great. It's my favorite time of the week because basically we all get together. It's fantastic. But we were talking about reflection, and we have never been more exposed as an organization, expected to work harder, do more with less for more people. But at the same time, we've never been more protected because really, as you say, the world's focus and attention is on healthcare and doing healthcare remotely. And really that's what we're created for. So we feel very fortunate. But I think for startups and for founders that are in sectors that are outside of the current scope of most of the world's focus, it's hard, right? Because pitching your company, believing your mission, living your mission, and then maybe having to challenge that or challenge what you focus on is very, very difficult because it's so closely linked with identity, especially for co-founders and founders. So yeah, I think, on one hand, startups are uniquely equipped to rip themselves apart and reconfigure to respond to this new world, this new environment, and see the challenges. And on the other hand, the missions that we choose to solve, that's in all our DNA. And it then becomes a question of being true to yourself and true to the values of your organization in whatever new thing you rebuild yourself to become. So there's going to be a very interesting sort of cultural and philosophical tension between that. But I would be hugely optimistic for a startup versus an established organization that had its place in the world, because the world is a very different place.
Yeah, with a startup, odds are so big. The win is big, the loss is big. I just had a conversation a few days ago with Jacob from Stasher. So I don't know if you know him.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Because being in the travel industry, they're just at the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's quite interesting to collect feedback and observations from people who are in different industries. That's why I'm motivated to actually do this and share this. And I think a part of that conversation comes back to timing and your assumptions, because as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you always try to think in models, in heuristics, and try to understand the market, the need, and find the solution, etc. And one of those comes back to timing. So if you have an assumption that everything's going to go back to normal in 3 months, versus you thinking it's not going to go back to normal ever. So these are different assumptions, and they change the models through which you think. The conversation I had today was, somebody told me, okay, we can do this once in 2 or 3 months, everything goes back to normal. Wouldn't that make more sense? And I said, it would, but I don't think it's going to go back to normal in 2, 3, nor in 8 months. So what is the model you build and base your other assumptions on in terms of how long a relative turn back to normal is going to be, if ever?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, it's really hard not to exist in your bubble when you're in a startup. It's like I think I would forgive any founder from sort of, thinking that the world begins and ends with the problem they're solving for, even if that's like quite niche, right? So like, I've been like quite polarized in my thinking towards, healthcare will pretty much be solved as long as, if only we can fix clinical communication. If we do that, healthcare will be just transformed. And, it's true to an extent. But I think, in our situation, like actually, healthcare and health technology has just broken through so many walls that were standing in the way of progress. So in the particular sector of healthcare, genuinely the world won't be the same. I would say it won't be the same in a good way, actually. Several weeks ago, rather, there was central guidance from the NHS, which essentially gave permission to move faster and solve problems rather than do things in the way they'd always been done before. So essentially gave permission to healthcare organizations, and it gave permission to solution suppliers to fix problems first, to be very pragmatic in the approach, because this is a crisis. Now, I think when you start as an industry to live and work in that way, you realize what you're capable of achieving. Like you realize like what your top gear is, what your top speed is, and you see the benefit of being able to work like that. Now, I'm not suggesting that the world after this, especially in healthcare, is going to be flat out just fix problems. Of course not. But I think it will reset the lens that we look through in terms of pragmatism around benefit versus risk. So I think that it's only good news for certain sectors. I think other sectors, it's hard to say, right? It's really difficult. It's really difficult to say, and I wouldn't feel confident in sort of commenting actually. But there may be new sectors, and this is the thing. I suppose again, as founders and startup teams, the opportunity then becomes, well, what lateral skills have you got? because you mentioned Stasher, right? I'm like, okay, so I can totally see why this would be a big problem for those guys. But equally, what have they got that this new world needs? You know, whether it's an understanding of logistics, whether it's a network that they can leverage in some new way. You know, we start to think about what our skills are, what our competencies are, and how they fit with this new world. So yeah, I think way too dangerous and way too soon to be predicting if and when we'll get back to normal. But from a healthcare perspective, I think we will be more enlightened because of it.
I think it is safe to say you still have to have a good idea, a good value proposition, but at least people's attention have shifted. So when you're talking about healthcare, I think people will be listening differently than they would before this, all of these crises. Is there anything you'd like to add to conclude? I did appreciate our chat. I think they are very good, very important remarks, and your journey is very interesting.
I think it's like compassion and almost a neighborly instinct is what's keeping society strong outside of the startup bubble. Mm-hmm. But equally, it's potentially the opportunity for within the startup bubble as well. And there are very talented people who are maybe not solving problems right now, who could be. I don't think that there's really ever been a better opportunity to share our skills and share our resources. And I think that whereas some companies are going to be struggling, others will be struggling for different reasons. And I think this is a time to share, and it's a time to collaborate more than ever. I'm a little, I always get a bit disheartened, you talk about like the macro worldview, and I really hope that isn't the case. I really hope it is, and I really hope that we can in some way unite and be stronger, united for it. But certainly, and especially if we look at, even just the London ecosystem, we've got a lot of resource here. We've got a hell of a lot of brain power, and we have, probably the world's leading healthcare system. Certainly in terms of sort of collective understanding and faith, I think that we have a unique position really in our role when it comes to responding to this and also to architecting the future from this. So yeah, I think if I had a thought, it would be, how can we all collaborate more? How can we all share more? And why, when the world is rebuilt, why not rebuild as much of it as we can from London?
Some problems are too big for individuals. That's why we build companies, and the word of company is actually a company of people, bringing people together, right? And in this case, some problems are just too big for singular companies. So companies of companies need to come together, and that's through a spirit of collaboration.
And it's a funny thing as well. I recognize, you've got to go, but like one more thought. I remember, years of reasons why we can't all work remotely, okay? Like, oh yeah, yes, we can do video conferencing, and yes, I can call you, and yes, I can Slack you or whatever, but it's like, it's not the same as being in the same room as somebody. And of course, it's not the same as being in the same room as
It doesn't need to be the same.
Totally agree, exactly, totally good. It doesn't have to be the same. But what's really interesting is that, no matter what people's objections to working remotely, I think we've kind of got over a lot of that stuff now, right? We've proven that A, we can do it, but B, if we have a common interest and a common goal and a common objective, actually, I can get over not shaking your hand. And you can get over me not offering you a cup of coffee. It's fine.
Sorry.
But as long as we can communicate, and communicate we can, there's no reason why we can't work together. So if those barriers can come down, certainly within companies, it can sure as hell come down between companies.
I agree with that. There was a very interesting point. Let me end with that. It would never be ethically okay to do an experiment on millions of people, okay, and have a control group. Okay, 1 million people stay at home, work from home, 1 million do it, but now all of a sudden we can run that. We have the data from that experiment, and it actually pushes understanding of ourselves and of our society in such profound ways that, as someone who has a background in sociology, I'm totally fascinated by the change that's currently going on. I mean, imagine just in a totally unrelated conversation in the future, people are having, okay, if we send people to Mars and they decide to live there, would it be okay if we isolated them in pods and they just communicated over video call? Would that be okay? Now we have a different perspective to that problem, totally unrelated, totally of the future, but we now have different data. So there's always room for learning and experiencing, and humans are remarkably adaptable, and so are startups. Thank you very much for joining this session of our interviews, understanding the effects of COVID-19 on the startup ecosystem in London. Thanks very much. It was a pleasure to have you on.
No, it's a pleasure too. All the best.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.